اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
One of the brothers from our community who is our car parking attendant, who of course looks after our properties. He has a close friend of his who was attacked today in Hare Hills. He was stabbed and he is currently in intensive care. The Muslim brother from our Muslim communities, and we should recite dua for him to have a quick and full recovery. For all of those around the world who are in need as well. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ 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 برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ثم جعلناك على شريعة من الأمر فاتبعها ولا تتبع أهواء الذين لا يعلمون إنهم لن يغنوا عنك من الله شيئا وإن الظالمين بعضهم أولياء بعض والله ولي المتقين. هذا بصائر للناس وهدى ورحمة لقوم يوقنون. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
عظم الله وجودنا وأجوركم بمصابنا أبي عبد الله الحسين صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. Tonight is our 10th discussion in this series. Inshallah, on Wednesday night, we will have a conclusion which ties the whole series together, allows us to have certain points which will give us an idea of where we can start taking these discussions forward from. Yesterday, we looked at the ideas that govern the way in which we think about inter and intra-faith dialogue. And we again looked at the question of master narratives and those ultimate ideas that will then feed down into everything else that we consider about inter and intra-faith dialogue. We started with the Quran and stated that the great quality of the Pharaoh or the pharaonic system is that they carve people into different groups and sects, and that they will make some amongst those weak and others amongst them strong, and therefore not only creating those divisions, but it would pit those different groups against each other. And so, rather than being able to fight the Pharaoh, we end up fighting each other. And then we looked at the book by Shashi Tharoor, which looks at the whole history of the British Empire in India. And we talked about how when the British came in, they put a census there to be able to divide communities where previously they were very fuzzy in their divisions. They saw each other as very together, to the extent that Shia and Sunnah used to commemorate Ashura together. They used to mourn together. But once the British came in and made differences amongst them and decided to pay people to exaggerate the differences amongst them, the Shia and the Sunni community split, and even until today fail to be able to come together for the man that they both claim to be the master of all free people, the man who saved Islam. Yet they seem incapable of commemorating his martyrdom under the same roof. Why? Because until today, after 300 years, we still allow the ideas that came from the British Empire as part of the master narrative. That we're supposed to do these things separately. Why? Because maybe I fear that one of my Sunni brethren might give praise to someone that I disagree with. And what? Let him give praise. And in the same space, allow me to be able to put my own side of the opinion forward. And let neither of us be so afraid of discussion. But because the ideas of the British Empire still rule until today, we are still so divided. Now, we also went and showed a video yesterday. If you recall, we showed a video from Fox News where Joel Rosenberg, a Sado scholar, is looking at the idea of Al-Mahdi, salamullahi alayhi, and that he is the Antichrist, and in order to bring him about, in order to bring his zuhur and appearance, the 12 Shi'as believe we need to create genocide in order for him to come. And so apparently, we're all looking for a nuclear weapon in order to blow everything up for the purpose of him coming thereafter. So there's two master narratives that are going on here, aren't there? The first one is about Muslims in general. Muslims cannot be civilized enough to work with each other, such that when it comes to the greatest tragedy in the history of their religion, they no longer can even sit with each other in order to commemorate that tragedy, whilst calling that very man whom they cry over to be the master of all free men. How free are we when we are still governed by the thinking of the British Empire? And the second master narrative that is presented to us is not just to us, it's about us. Specifically the Shia community. And the way in which now there is this dichotomy that is set up, and that the West must always be at war with the East. And not only that, it is particularly the Shia Muslims that are going to have this war with the West. And so you can imagine, when places like Al Saud occupied Hijaz, or places like from Al Khalifa in Bahrain, or places like, when they set themselves up against Iran, against Iraq, against Syria, against Lebanon, against Shiism, when those countries and those scholars and those kings and those puppets set themselves up also against Shiism, who do you think America and Britain are going to side with? If their belief system is that the Shias are trying to get a nuclear weapon to bomb everything in order to kill the Christians, in order to bring about their awaited savior, who is the Antichrist, whose side do you think the West is going to be on? Is it all falling into place? It's helping you to understand what's happening in the world, what's happening behind the geopolitics, what drives the discussion in closed doors. This is why, when they invaded Iraq after the tragedies of 9/11, George Bush said, "This is a religious war." Quote, "This is a war for Christianity." against the Middle East. All of the things that are happening, there are certain things that are happening behind it. And of course, they can't tell you that this is a war in the name of certain things, because otherwise it becomes a religious war, and it becomes something that creates extremism. It's easier to cloak it in geopolitics. Now there's these two master narratives that are taking place. One, that the Muslims cannot come together, and two, that the Shi'as are this way inclined. And we stated yesterday that we need to be able to find a different master narrative. And we presented to you a book written by a great scholar living by the name of Dr. Richard Bullitt. Ahsantum. And Dr. Bullitt has written this book about the Islamo-Christian civilization, and the idea that East and West are not perpetually at war with each other. No. Also, Christianity and Islam are not at war with each other, but rather there is one civilization, an Islamo-Christian civilization, that there is one history. We have always been working together. We've always been learning from each other. We've always been bettering one another until the point of where we are today. Imagine if that narrative was told in school. Imagine if that narrative was told to our Christian friends. Imagine if that narrative was told to the rest of the Muslim community, how they might see this civilization as not East versus West, but rather East and West. Now, what I wish to be able to do tonight is to talk about two things. One, to develop on this idea of master narratives, and importantly, how quickly master narratives can change. And I want to give some evidence around that. And then I wish to be able to show some ideas that we can have about soft tabligh and the way in which we can think about spreading our faith and our ideas and being in certain spaces that ensures that we are able to make those changes, be it at a national level or, importantly, at the local level, which will end up blossoming the ideas at the national level. Imagine if you can change the discourse in a city, the ideas that people are reading from their local newspapers, what they're hearing on their local radio stations, when they're going to work, when they're talking about things, around the dinner table. If we're able to change that, you will change the master narratives that are about Islam and Christianity in particular in this country. Master narratives. As we stated, master narratives are those things that govern the way in which we think. It's an idea that's set at the top, and it feeds down, and so we end up adopting those ideas for ourselves. Those ideas about things like where we live, where we situate ourselves in these civilizational discourses. I'm going to show you an example of the types of master narratives that were upon the Christians at the inception of their own religion, in the 2nd and 3rd century AD. And then I wish to be able to show you how quickly some of these ideas changed, and then to give you an example of how the Holy Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, also changed master narratives in Arabia as well. We'll have an idea as to how the Prophet did things. So I brought with me another book, and this book is a very useful book. It's called Early Christian Thinkers, and it basically looks at the 10 earliest Christian giants that informed the way in which Christianity ended up thinking about. Right? They're great martyrs, those who did great Tabligh work. They established their philosophies, they established their theologies, and then all of Christianity goes back to that. Now, of course, the fact that there are 10 different scholars, they all come from different geographical locations, different scholarly traditions, different influences, which is a good way to understand not only the history of Christianity, but why there are so many different sects and the earliest different ideas that existed in Christianity. I'm just going to read one paragraph. And it's a really interesting paragraph. Think about how we have master narratives upon Muslims in Islam today. Muslims are violent. In Rotherham, the discussion is, as we've been talking about, Muslims Men want to take advantage of white working class girls. We talked about this. It's also the master narrative in Telford, in Shropshire. Look at this master narrative. Page 6. He says the following. Christians, for the name alone, that is, for the mere profession of Christianity, without the need specifically to prove their complicity in any crimes associated with their name. At that time, you could be accused of any crime as a Christian, and just by virtue of you being accused of a crime, because you were Christian, if I said you were Christian in a court, you would be found guilty of that crime. This was happening in the 2nd and 3rd centuries across these different empires. Now, it was, of course, assumed that there were such crimes, for there was an urban myth that was created about Christians. There was an urban myth widely held in the 2nd century that Christians routinely engaged in cannibalism. What is cannibalism? Eating other human beings. Specifically in this case, babies. There were widely held urban myths in the 2nd century that Christians routinely engaged in cannibalism and incest. What was called Theastean banquets and Opidian intercourse. Until the mid-3rd century, there was no such thing as general empire-wide persecution, but these were the types of narratives that were made about Christians. Just think about that for a second, because we often are unaware of the histories of other faith traditions and what they go through, because we only end up talking about our own faith traditions. We know very little about the Sunni Imams from the earliest times and how they used to oppose the Khulafa of their times. The earliest Sunni A'imma, at the time of our 6th and 7th Imam, they used to oppose the Khulafa as much as our own companions used to. But they just weren't Shia. So they were also thrown into the jails. They were also martyred as well. But we don't know these things. We don't know what the history of Judaism may be, for example, or Christianity may be, for example. Now here, the earliest Christians, it was the norm. The narrative was that they used to engage in these things. Now obviously, if you have a wider Roman or even a wider Judeo kind of thinking, and what you know about Christians is that they regularly eat babies, you're going to find any reason to reject their belief system. You're going to find any reason to persecute them. And if they become accused of some sort of crime, irrespective of what it is, you're going to find a way to be able to find them guilty, aren't you? 2,000 years ago. So these are the master narratives. But of course, after the 3rd century, when there was a whole shift, and there was the Council of Nicaea, and now Christians were able to come together and merge their faith with the pagan faith, the whole scenario changed. And now they were able to think freely about their own religion. Obviously, I'm not recommending that we merge our faith with pagans. I'm saying, look how quickly it can shift within 50 years, within 100 years, the discourse. Throughout the whole of our own histories, we also have multiple shifts, very quick shifts in thinking amongst people. And it doesn't take long. Sometimes it can take 100 years, 200 years of battling an idea, and eventually that idea can change, and sometimes you can swing between ideas very, very quickly. Let me give you some examples to be able to unpack what I mean by this. As an example, we will find that in the United States of America, both in terms of World War I and World War II, amongst the people, amongst the masses, there was the idea that the United States should not participate in either World War I or II. It had a very isolationist type of thinking. And for whatever reasons, they ended up going into those wars. But the people on the ground and the national discourse is, let's not get involved with issues abroad. Now just think about that. How many bases are there in the United States of America around the world today? Hundreds. I mean, I don't know the exact number. I could have checked it. It's hundreds, isn't it? No one knows the full number, right?
Real number.
And how many different places are they currently at war with? Everywhere, right? Just think about that. So some odd 70 years ago, the national discourse was, don't get involved with matters abroad. Now they have bases across the whole world and are apparently telling the whole world that they're the ones at threat. Now we need to have a whole idea of America first. America awwalan. Right? We need to have make America great again with the caps. Can you see? The discourse shifts, doesn't it? Only a few years ago, they voted in their first black president. The discourse was, and they thought they were moving to a post-racialist society. And the discourse was, eventually they will be voting in their first female president. It only took a few years, and they were able to shift the discourse so far right that they're able to get now a toddler-in-chief, a racist toddler-in-chief, as their president. The discourse shifts so far. I'll show you an interesting book. I haven't read this book. One of the sisters was asking me earlier today. She says, when you mention these books, do you read every one of them? I said, well, look, sometimes we read the whole book. Sometimes we read certain chapters from the book that are pertinent. And sometimes you might watch the scholar, the author of the book, talking about his book. So we don't have to read the entire book all the time. So I haven't read any of this book. But it's just an interesting book. Is it up? Yeah? What does it say? How the Irish became white. Now tell me, what skin colour are Irish people? White. Why do you think that there needed to be a book in history entitled How and When the Irish Became White? Why do you think?
There's no Irish, no black.
Yeah, right, but exactly, right? So you remember, it wasn't so long ago in this country, there were signs. No blacks, no Irish, no dogs. Right? So basically, these three were not only banned, there was an equivalence made between these groups. But think about this. I'm not saying, obviously, I understand, but I understand why they said no blacks, right? I understand why they said no dogs, right? Why no Irish in England? Why no Irish in England? Surely in England, it's white. Surely Irish are also white. Why would there be a need to consider the Irish not to be white? This is way before the IRA. Yeah. You know, the idea was simple. Again, whiteness was something that they wanted to own. So then they could say, you're not white. You're not really white. So there's even a period in our recent history where Irish people weren't even considered white. They had to earn their whiteness. Forget me and you. The whites didn't let whites be white. Can you imagine the extent of the racism that was in this country? The Irish weren't considered white. There are other historical reasons, because the Moors actually went with the Irish and there was some cohabitation, so there was some interracial mixing, but that's way separate. That is mentioned in the book, but that's way separate. The real issue is that because they've been at war, because there's been this hostility between Protestants and Catholics, between English and Irish, the simple way of making you hate them was considering them white, but not really valued as white. The same thing happens today. When our Polish friends come across, when our Romanian friends come across from Europe, you know, when they entered into the EU, now that it was 28 states, right? So now many of our Polish and Romanian friends came to the British Isles in order to find work. Immediately there was racism towards them. But they're white as well. Why? Because they were deemed lesser white. Sometimes whites didn't even consider whites at all. Now, if you understand that this was 100 years ago, 100 years ago, in the late 18th century, 1850s to the early 1900s, Irish weren't even considered white. No one would dare say that today, right? No one would dare go to an Irish person, you're not white. And if you ask the youth of Ireland, most of them probably don't even know about this, that their great-grandfathers weren't considered white. It just took a shift in the discourse. It just took a shift in the understanding of people. Eventually, Brits just decided to focus on racism towards black people. And then after the Caribbeans, we all moved over. So it shifted from not only blacks, but browns. Yeah? So eventually they forgot about their racism towards fellow whites. How quickly it changed. 50 years of a discussion. And eventually the whole thing changed such that until today, even most people here, how many people knew that Irish weren't considered white 100 years ago? One or two. But most white people don't even know that history. How quickly the situation can change, the narrative can change, and people won't even know what happened one generation back, 2 generations back. We are in control. When we want to drop something in, we're able to change the way people think very, very quickly. That makes sense? Yeah? Now, if you appreciate this point, you will immediately ask a question. How did the Holy Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, change certain master narratives in his society? And it wasn't easy. There was blood, sweat and tears that went into that. There was persecution that went into that. And we told you before, we've mentioned that obviously certain groups would have really responded negatively to the shifting of master narratives. Why? Because they would have felt that their own power and master narratives would have been a threat. So what did they do? They lashed out and they created their own responding master narratives. So therefore you have to know that when we change things, it won't be as easy as just, oh, I'll tell you to think differently. There's going to be a backlash. But the Prophet himself had many ways to be able to do this. Now some of these ahadith, if I tell you them, you'll be shocked at them. They will be strange, ajib, strange narrations that some of us might not be able to wrap our head around. But we don't have to follow the narration per se. We have to understand first and foremost the extent of the problem that was in society first. And once we grapple with the extent of the problem, when we then come to the narrations, we're easier to understand how the Prophet changed certain master narratives in his own society. Let me explain the problem, and then inshallah we come to some of the narrations as to how he dealt with it. What was the single biggest problem in Mecca? Do you remember we mentioned Medina had certain challenges? What was in Medina? We mentioned faith. But the problem was, you had all the priests and the rabbis making up the faith as they went along. Right? The Quran says, الَّذِينَ يَكْتَبُونَ الْكِتَابَ بِأَيْدِيهِمْ. They used to just write the books of God with their own hand. What was the main problem in Mecca? There was polytheism. There was also atheism and agnosticism. We talked about this in the second and third night. Now the problem with polytheism is obviously that it's against Tawheed. But why should Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have such a problem with you worshipping an idol? I mean, if you want to worship an idol, is Allah challenged by this? Of course not. Allah harmed by this? Of course not. So why does Allah say that shirk is that one sin that is so unforgivable, that is so problematic in society, that every prophet had to come in order to say, stop believing in these idols? What's the problem with believing in idols and shirk? The problem is this. Imagine this is my idol. And actually, for most of us, our phones are our idols. Yeah? But imagine not this phone, right? But there's an idol here, right? It's a stone. It's a stick. It's clumped together. And I'm going to name it something. And I'm going to put an attribute and say, this is the god of war. So every time I go to war, I need to pray to this idol in my hand that I made with my own hands, that I fashioned with my own time. What's the problem with this? The problem is really simple. The problem is that if I am able to think about something that I've created with my own hands as being my God, it tells me that I'm so shackled in my intellectual thinking that I'm even willing to believe something like that. Just think about it rationally. Going and sitting with a person 1400 years ago, and imagine having a rational conversation. Say, where did that idol come from? And he's like, my back garden. And why is it shaped the way it's shaped? Well, I began to chip away at it. And what is it that you believe it does for you? I believe that when I pray to it, it gives me an increase in rizq. At that point, surely, the human mind would say, there's something going wrong with me here. But they didn't think that. They actually continued to believe these things. Now therefore, if your brain, your mind, your aql is so shackled that you're willing to believe that thing that you have created with your own hands is actually a God over you, now that it's shackled your mind, it's easy for me to be able to shackle your mind in any other way. If I'm able to make you believe that that thing that you created with your own hands is your God, indeed, I will be able to make you believe anything else I want you to believe. True or not? Because your mind is so shackled anyway. What difference does it make it to your mind if it's now going to believe something else nonsensical? So now, when the tribal leaders used to say, this tribe, my enemy, they said something bad about us, we have to go to war, rather than thinking for yourself and being able to actually challenge that as a rational thought, well, hang on a minute, should we go to war with this tribe? Should we give our blood for the sake of whatever this tribal leader is saying, just following blindly whatever this tribal leader is saying? You don't have the rational capacity to think for yourself. Whatever the tribal leader says, goes. So when the Prophet came, not only are we talking about breaking shirk, we're also talking about breaking a shackle that would then open the rest of the shackles. If you can get rid of that asl, you're able to help break the furu'. Does that make sense? So the Prophet had to be able to break that shackle. But of course, as I told you in previous nights, people like Abu Sufyan, they had their power and wealth in that particular idol. Therefore, when that idol was being smashed in front of them, of course Abu Sufyan wasn't going to allow it. So how did the Prophet get these people to think for themselves? He saw that they were so shackled in their thinking that the Prophet had to challenge their thinking in a way that would shake them and be willing and help them to be willing to think for themselves. This is really important. Changing master narratives doesn't happen overnight. When the American Revolution took place, it was the North versus the South. The South were fighting for what? Slavery, right? They actually believed wholeheartedly still that it was their moral and God-given right to own another human being. If you went to the South today in America, yes, racism is still there. But if you asked any of them, do you still believe that you can own another human being? They won't say yes, will they? They'll say no. It takes time. It takes 50, 100 years. But once you break that thing, people are then willing to be more open. They're willing to change their thinking. The Prophet had to come and break certain shackles such that these people were able to think for themselves freely for the first time. Let's give you some hadith as to how the Prophet did it. And even though these are strange hadiths, don't look at it through your lens of what you think today. Put yourself in the shoes of those people 1400 years ago and their practices. As an example, when we went for Hajj, we had the honor of visiting Masjid Quba, right? Now, as we go to Masjid Quba, there are certain ahadith about the people of that area. Quba was what? Quba was what? The first masjid, right? As the Prophet came from Mecca to Medina, he stations himself outside Medina for a few days, and he builds the first ever masjid, correct? Masjid Quba. That area had people living around it. And so, there was no need for them to move into Medina. Those people stayed in that area and kept Masjid Quba as their local masjid, and they used to be around that place. They were mu'mineen. They ended up becoming mu'mineen. One day, the hadith says that a plague, a real fever, a real strong, harsh fever descended on those people of the area of Quba, that town of the people of Quba. What happened was, the angel that was bringing that fever came to the Prophet and said, to whom should I send this fever to? To whom should we be stricken with illness? The Prophet sent the illness to the people of Quba. Go and give it to them. So, that fever struck down those people. And anyone who's had fever, you know it's not great. You're lying in your bed, you're shaking, you're unable to move, you don't have your strength until you get better. Some people from Quba heard that the Prophet had sent this fever towards them. So they came to Medina to visit the Prophet and engage in a discussion with him. They said, Ya Rasulullah, we hear you have sent us this fever, and the reason why we are struggling with this illness is because of you. Is this true? Rasulullah in the hadith says, yes, I am the one who directed the fever towards you. He said, Ya Rasulullah, if you sent it towards us, pray for the fever to be lifted. We don't want this anymore. We're struggling. We've been in bed for 3 days, feverish. Rasulullah said the following. Think about this hadith and what was happening in their minds and the change in master narratives. The Prophet responded and said to them, I can pray and lift the fever from you immediately. God will remove the fever from you immediately. Or you can bear it for 3 more days and Allah will wipe away all of your sins. Which one do you want? Now let me put it to you as an audience. Yeah? Sometimes we hear, don't we, that when we become ill, Allah is washing away our sins, correct? It's from hadith like these. So think about that for a second. If I gave you an opportunity, and I say, look, you're going to be struck down for fever for 3 days, and Allah can wipe your sins clean such that you're like a newborn baby, or not, which one would you take? I need a bit more of a consensus. There's only one person who said they would take it, which means the rest of you will not take it. Which one? Yes or no? You'll take it? Excellent, you'll take it. Yeah. Now, why will you take it? Because you'll realize that your akhirah is more valuable than these 3 short days of dunya. But also, if you were people that previously didn't believe in God, or worse still, you were types of people that when something afflicted you, you would blame God, like sometimes people do. If you were able to learn through that practically, if the Prophet gave to you a practical test that you were able to go through, the next time you got a similar test of when something goes wrong in your life, no longer will you blame Allah, you will understand why you're going through that test. Do you understand? You've all been through tests, correct? And when you come out of that test, you begin to understand it. There was a reason for that. It helped me develop in this way. Something came off the back of it. Inna ma'al usri yusra. Surely after difficulty there will be ease. You will feel the pain. But at the end of it, you will learn the reasons of the suffering. Instead of going, oh Allah, I blame you for what I'm going through in life. Like Iblis did in the Quran. Do you remember? He says, I will deviate them the way in which you have deviated me, God. Who is he blaming? God. There are human beings that when they go through a test, they lose a family member, they lose their business, they lose their health, something happens to them immediately. God, why have you done this to me? If you are that way inclined as a community, as a society, the Prophet can't just come and tell you, believe in God. He has to help you experientially believe in God. You understand? So the Prophet sent them this disease, and they chose to accept the disease for the purpose of getting something better out of it. Next time they would be challenged in life, they would also understand the challenge. The master narrative shifted. They used to blame God. They used to be people of weak faith. One 3-day incident changed the way in which they understood God for the rest of their lives. This is the beauty and the wisdom of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. Now, let's really play with your minds, because I like to do that. Let's really shake you a little bit and give you an interesting set of ahadith, and let's negotiate them. Let's navigate these two ahadith. One is very famous. The second one is going to be very famous. The second one is not famous, but it's mentioned in both Shi'i and Sunni texts. Differently, slight variations, but it's so famous amongst fuqaha and agreed upon by the fuqaha that they actually use this ahadith to make a fiqhi principle, which I'll explain to you in a few minutes' time. Let's go through the different narrations first. Master narratives and changing the way in which people think through these master narratives. The Prophet converted a village, a tribe. And let's just pick a number and say the tribe had 500 people, 1,000 people. They would engage with the wakil of the Prophet, an ambassador, the representative of the Prophet. And so they would say to the Prophet, teach us Islam, so now that we've converted en masse, we are able to believe and we are able to act properly. So one day the Prophet writes some instructions to his representative, and the representative goes out of Medina and gets to the village. He says, the Prophet is now giving you all instructions. Are you ready? They say, Labbaik, we're here, we're at your service, we're ready. The Prophet commands you, dig a trench. Dig a large hole, a large pit, dig a big trench. So they all spend their afternoon digging this massive trench, huge hole, Now what? The ambassador is reading the instructions. Rasulullah says, fill that trench, fill that hole with lots of brush. Fill it with leaves, fill it with sticks, fill it with brush. So now they're all going and they're doing they're putting brush inside and they're filling it all up. Now, what do? Rasulullah says, set it all on fire. So they put it up in blaze. It's a big ditch filled with a giant blaze. Now what? Rasulullah tells you, all jump in it. Huh? What do you mean, huh? Rasulullah tells you, all of you, go and jump in it. Are you serious? Yeah, no, it's right here. Rasulullah says jump in it. This part I'm exaggerating for comic relief. Yeah? Jump in it. This is true. This hadith. Jump in it. Shia and Sunni texts. Jump in it. What do you think happened? Well, the tribe split in two. One half said, Labbaika ya Rasulullah. Rasulullah, this is our messenger. We believe in him. He's told us to jump inside the fire. We have to jump inside the fire. The other half, they were like, not jumping in the fire. What do you mean jump in the fire? This can't be correct. We're not jumping in the fire. So now the two groups are arguing with each other. 500 on this side, 500 on this side. And they're yelling and they're shouting and there's fisticuffs. No, Rasulullah said it. No, this is crazy. No, Rasulullah said it. In the end, the entire tribe came to one unified decision. You can't answer this. You can't answer this. What do you think happened? Did they jump into the fire or did they not jump into the fire? Now think about it. If Rasulullah came to you and said, jump in the fire, would you do it or not? Now think, what did the tribe do? What do you think? Let's get a bit of a show of hands. Who says that they jumped into the fire? All of them. All of them. Put your hands up. And say it's like 10, 20% max of you. So the rest of you, who thinks it's that they didn't jump into the fire? Yeah, it seems to be a majority. This is good democracy right here. Maybe that's how they ended up deciding this issue, I don't know. Rasulullah says, jump into the fire. They split into two groups. In the end, all of them came together and said that we will not jump into the fire. Oh man, got it wrong. A for effort. We will not jump into the fire. The ambassador leaves. He returns back to Medina. Says, Ya Rasulullah, I come to you with news. Rasulullah says, tell me what happened. They didn't jump into the fire. They all disobeyed you. They all refused. Rasulullah responded, had they jumped into the fire, they would have been raised on the day of judgment in fire. Meaning what? Meaning it would have been a sin. Had they jumped into the fire, had they listened to me, they would have been raised on the day of judgment in Nar. Think about it. If you were reading this hadith, what would you do? Would you tear the page out and go, can't allow this kind of craziness, this nonsense to be mentioned in the books of hadith? I'm sorry. This is an Abu Hurairah tradition. I'm not accepting this. Or would you think deeper? Why do you think the Prophet challenged them to do that? And why do you think the Prophet was pleased that they disobeyed him? What was he trying to teach them? Think for yourself. You see, previously, as I said to you earlier, they would follow their masters, their tribal leaders, even if it didn't make sense to them. But the Prophet is trying to break a shackle and help them and think, look, a minute ago you were worshipping stones. If I bring you this religion and your thinking is no different and you're just going to bow and go up and bow and go up and go into sajda and say la ilaha, but your thinking is the same, then what difference does it make? If you're going to still follow your customs blindly without having any rationality, any moral understanding of what you're doing, even though you may claim yourself to be Muslim, reality is, what difference will it make to you? Daesh, they call themselves Muslim, correct? We have to call themselves Muslim. We have to call them Muslim because they are Muslim. But what are they thinking when they do these things? Are they following Islam? Has Islam been of any benefit to them? So what was the point in bringing them Islam? If whenever one of their tribal leaders says, go and behead a Shia, they go and behead a Shia. When they say go and do this, when go and blow yourself up, they go and do it. Is their thinking there? Is their thinking there? So what good is their Islam to them? Do you understand? So the Prophet had to come to a group of people and liberate them from their thinking. Because otherwise, even if they became Muslim, their Islam would not help them. How many of those people ended up just following their Jahiliyyah practices into Islam? True or not? Be it a caliph, or be it a companion, or be it those on the battlefield against Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. The Prophet came and he broke those shackles of thinking and he changed their master narrative. You know what the Prophet said after this? The hadith that comes from this, that all the fuqaha accept. All the fuqaha accept. The Prophet said, there is no such thing as obeying the created if it means disobeying the Creator. I told you to go into the fire, but if you had done it, you'd be disobeying the Creator, because suicide is haram. You know that hadith is used in fiqh. If parents come and say to their young children, don't pray, don't wear hijab, Someone comes and says, do I listen to my parents? Listening to my parents is wajib, correct? But now I have a conflict. God tells me wear hijab. God tells me to pray. My parents are telling me, look, it's a Western world, no thing is hijab in this time. We're all really modern. You're not going to find a job. You're not going to find a spouse. You're not going to... Who do you agree with? Who do you obey? God. The Prophet said, there is no such thing as obeying the created if it means disobeying the Creator. That's where this asl, this qa'idah in fiqh comes from these ahadith. So the Prophet had to shift the master narratives, that if you're going to follow your leader, understand what you're doing. Don't just jump into the fire for the sake of your leader, understand what you're doing. Now if you understood this, the Prophet came to these pagans, came to these mushrikeen, came to these people who were so backwards in their thinking, and the Prophet had to shake them in the way in which they were, such that they could free themselves from that shackle. Imagine only 50, 60 years later, when Abu Abdullah alayhi salam on the battlefield has to return them back to this principle, and says, if you do not believe in God, or in the afterlife, then at least be free people. Don't kill my 6-month-old baby. They have gone back into their jahiliyyah. They were the same people that were huffaz of the Quran. Same people that on this night, 10th night of Muharram, 61, 62 AH, what were they doing? They were praying Salat al-Layl. What good did it do them? Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam had to tell them and say to them, if you don't believe in God, then at least be free people. Don't sell your souls to Yazid for a small stipend. So having understood that we can change master narratives with effort, with a way in which opens up the mind, we then need to conclude for a few minutes by thinking about applying this into the tabligh that we do, and the way in which we export our faith and engage with other faith-based communities. Now, the Quran talks to us a lot about tabligh and da'wah work. And I'm only going to mention 2 verses and show you certain principles of how we can engage and spread this faith in a way that is able to shift the thinking of people and help them to change their own master narratives. As an example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Al-Imran, chapter number 3, verse number 104. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. وَلْتَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. Then let there be from amongst you an ummah, a group of people, يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ. Their task is to go on calling people towards goodness. وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. What does this mean? This means that there must be an ummah, there must always be a group amongst you who is specifically engaged in da'wah, يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ, that you call towards goodness. That's your role. Here, brothers and sisters, in our own communities, every Husayniyah, every masjid, it would be befitting of us if we had a tabligh committee. People who are committed to the idea of tabligh, da'wah, spreading the faith, and did so in certain ways that would be beneficial to be able to change people's thinking and have people bring them towards the faith of Islam. Very important. The Quran tells you, let there be an ummah that does this. So let there be an ummah from amongst you. Let there be a group from amongst you that does this, that is engaged, that finds this their area of interest, that they're trained, they understand how to engage, how to talk, how to be able to debate, what their points of proof are, how they're able to respond to criticisms of the faith, and then go out and engage in those dialogues. The faith shouldn't be stagnant. The faith shouldn't be hemorrhaging people, where we're losing people out of Islam because of the secularist movement, because of the atheist movement. Our movement should be one where we're bringing people towards the faith. This is one verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions in chapter number 33, Surah Al-Ahzab, verse number 39. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. These are principles. الَّذِينَ يُبَلِّغُونَ رِسَالَاتِ اللَّهِ. Those who go on delivering the message of Allah. They are risaliyun. Those who are the risaliyun. وَيَخْشَوْنَهُ. They fear Him, Allah. وَلَا يَخْشَوْنَ أَحَدَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. And they do not fear any other than Allah. Subhanallah. Qualities of those people. وَكَفَى بِاللَّهِ حَسِيبًا. This verse then tells us that there are some people who are supposed to be risaliyun. They go and deliver the message. They go to places. They actually go and deliver the message. These are verses of the Quran that we have forgotten in this society. Now often we see our Sunni brethren, and some of them, they have a very strong version, opposite of soft tabligh, a very strong tabligh. Have you seen them? They'll stand with a table, and there'll be lots of books, and there'll be a very nice brother, and he'll be telling you about Islam, and this is not the type of tabligh we're talking about. Being strategic, being soft, having principles and methodologies and ways to be able to do this. Where do we start? Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Has the following hadith. لا توقع بالعدو قبل القدرة. Do not face your adversary before you are powerful enough to defeat him. So when a person goes out and wants to represent the religion of Allah, Jalla Jalaluhu, they should have the qualities and the capabilities of being able to do so. They should have the akhlaq of being able to do so, such that they don't put people off the religion. And they should have the knowledge to be able to do so, which means that when we have that group of people in every Husseiniya, in every community that is a Tabligh committee, people committed to spreading the faith, you need to give them the investment of the training to be able to help them to argue their case and develop them in the tools of Tabligh. I'll give you an example, and say it is here from LMYG, and we also have our community coming together. We're going to make a recommendation as an example. You don't have to stick to this specific thing, but I'm making it as a recommendation, as a practical tool. In the world in which we live in, we've been speaking over these nights, we have the challenge of atheism, we have the challenge of secularism, we have the challenge of Islamophobia. We have now the challenge of Shi'aphobia, which I showed you yesterday from Fox News. These are international movements with millions of dollars being put into them. What we have certain Shia who are specialists in debate. They work either for or have their own businesses that teach how to debate. You've heard of things like the Model UN Club, right? MUN, where people go and they represent like a country, their youth. They go to the UN, or they pretend to be part of the UN and they debate. They talk about what needs to happen to uplift humanity. These are things that youth do in their schools. In our own communities, we need to be able to train our youths to be able to understand arguments, how arguments are created, how false logic comes in, where weak logic comes in, and how to be able to respond with good arguments. We need, in this era, for us to have debate societies. And we need those professional companies and those Shias who are actual debate champions, international debate champions, to help teach our youth to be able to understand their own views and even learn to argue against their own views. To learn how to construct an argument, to learn how to deconstruct someone else's argument, and then to be able to respond adequately. Now this is important for you to understand. There are two things that I will tell you. If you look at the history of the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, our A'imma alayhimus salam taught specialist students how to debate, and they forbade other students of theirs from debating. This is so important. Today, everyone goes onto Facebook and wants to debate, irrespective of whether they have the knowledge, whether they have any akhlaq. They're on these nonsense groups, they're cursing out Sunnis, they're cursing out other people, and they're ruining the reputation of our faith. I say that with no qualms. They are ruining the reputation of our faith. I remember I was reciting in Manchester in Shahr Ramadan, and we were talking about this issue of Shia Sunni Tabligh work. And I kid you not, I actually brought them. And I said, you know what? I'll show you one thread. There's a discussion group on Facebook. And it was, the usual nonsense, ranting, Shia Sunni, this, that. You know what Shia actually said? It's like, my Imam is better than your Caliph because Ali ibn Abi Talib, my Imam, beat up Umar ibn al-Khattab. Now, I know I'm still a young student of Islam, and maybe everyone here collectively, you have good knowledge. Is there any hadith that you know of Ali ibn Abi Talib beating up Umar ibn al-Khattab? It's nonsense. Nonsense. But this is what Shia are doing. They're doing this on platforms, public platforms. The Imam said, be an adornment for us. Don't be an embarrassment to us. We need Shia who are trained in thinking, trained to be able to navigate arguments, understand logical fallacies, understand proofs, to have memorized these ayat, these ahadith, to memorize scientific arguments, so that when they're sitting with atheists who believe in science, they understand how science can aid them in proving God's existence, not disproving God's existence. Then when we sit with our Christian brethren, we understand how to deconstruct arguments, how to present the very best arguments that we have. My recommendation is that you need in your madrasas, to make it compulsory part of education, techniques of how to be able to learn good debating skills. The Quran says, Ud'u ila sabili, call towards the way of Allah, bil hikmati wal maw'idha. You have to call with wisdom and with a good way of being able to do so. We need to empower. As Imam Ali alayhi salam said, don't go out to engage with those who are your antagonists without being prepared to be able to do so. Recommendation number 1. Again, Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa alayhi
talks about the style of engagement that you need to have with people. He says the following. He says in one hadith, Za'ilu a'da'illah wa wasilu awliya Allah. Keep away from the enemies of Allah, but maintain close ties with the friends of Allah. Just maintain those ties. Make sure that the Christian community feels welcome here and you are welcome there. Feel free and comfortable and confident in your religion to allow the Christian priests to come in and teach Christianity to you, so we understand their belief systems, in the knowledge tomorrow that you will also get a reciprocal invite to be able to teach Islam to a Christian group. Imagine when you present them with the Zams of Al-Muhammad. Imagine when you talk to them about God through the words of Nahj al-Balagha. Can you imagine that discussion? Imagine presenting those. I don't mean this. If there's any Christian watching this, any Jew watching this, may Allah bless the text that they have. Wallahi thumma wallahi. I have sat in those groups. The extent of the way in which Amir al-Mu'mineen, or al-Sadiq, or al-Kadhim, or al-Rida, salamullahi alayhim ajma'een, recite their ad'iyah, or the way in which they talk about God, there is no comparison in their text versus our texts. This is why Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam said, O my Shia, may Allah have rahmah upon you, the ones who enliven our words. For if you were to just tell them our words, they would flock towards us. This is number 2. Engagement. Engage with them properly, genuinely. participate in ongoing sessions of discussion on Tawheed, on Nubuwwat, on Akhlaq, on morality, and you'll be able to show the extent of the ideas in the school of Ahlul Bayt. The last hadith that gives us certain principles of soft tabligh, shifting the narrative, again, is a very important one. Many people won't like this idea. This hadith comes to us from our fifth Imam, Muhammad al-Baqir, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam has a phenomenal hadith. He says the following: and know that you will not become our friend. Friend of who? Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. Know that you will not become our friend. You want to be friendly, you want to be on good terms with Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. And know you will not become our friend until such a time that if all the inhabitants of your city collectively form an opinion about you and say, indeed you are a bad person, this should not make you sorrowful until you have compared yourself with the book of Allah. If you find it that you are in accordance with the book of Allah, then you may be pleased that you are on the truth without having exerted much effort to find out that you are on the truth. But, he says, if you find out that you are not, and you compare yourself with it, and the criticism of you comes that you are not really in line with the ideas of religion of Allah, the real ideas of the religion of Allah, you should be pleased that that person has pointed out to you a flaw that you have. I tell you, one person told me very, very recently that they wrote a letter of complaint to a managing committee. It's not here, don't worry. Yeah. Rasul hasn't received this letter. The person said, I wrote a letter to a managing committee telling them that they did A, B, and C, and then I wrote the link of the mas'ala from the website of Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Hussein al-Sistani, Dama Tawfiqahu, to say that you've done X, here is the absolute, there is no discussion, there's no dispute, here is the fatwa. You know what the person was told? You shouldn't do this because they will keep hold of these complaints that they have again, that you've made, and then tomorrow they will use it against you. Can you imagine? Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam says that if you've been criticized, you should be pleased. Either way, you should be happy. Because if you're on the right and you checked yourself against the book of Allah, you found out that you're on the right without much effort. And then if you checked it against the book of Allah and you find out you were wrong, you should be even more pleased because you've learned better behavior. Many of us, we can't take criticism. Managing committees can't take criticism. Organizations, they can't take criticism. You have one person in place as the head of the community, 10 years, 20 years, someone comes and says, maybe there's another way of doing things, maybe we're not finding that the youth are turning up, maybe we're finding that the sisters aren't finding it worthwhile, maybe. The moment you show them, they want to hold these things against you. When we engage with friends outside, in the Sunni community, when we engage with our Christian and Judaic friends, any other group, and they have criticisms of Muslims or Islam, don't feel offended. You also have criticisms of them, and you expect them to think through what you tell them. When you engage in this tabligh, be free to accept what they say and learn through those discussions that you will have, and inshallah, we will all be able to change the narratives about each other, and then over a period of a short number of decades, we will be able to present a true understanding of what Islam is. Tabligh is necessary in the time in which we live in. Tabligh is a great space. At the moment, our Sunni friends are doing more tabligh than the Shia. If you believe in the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, if you believe in the Thaqalain, bring the Thaqalain to the world. Invite them in. Go there. Engage. Not once a year. Not once off in Shahr Ramadan. Not once a year in Hussein Day. Engage systemically and bring about a change in thinking. And as I've shown you, you will see changes very quickly can occur. All the belief systems that used to happen in this country, it's only taken a few years and they've shifted it. They don't believe in slavery. They don't believe that the Irish are no longer not white. Imagine what you and I can do about God, the Quran, the Holy Prophet of Islam, and also to introduce the master of all free men, Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
All of our faith traditions believe in Ibrahim, salamullahi alayhi. The narration says that when he sees this dream 3 days in a row, he comes to his son, the Prophet Ismail alayhi salam, and says, "This is what I see in my dream. What do you see?" He responds by saying, "Do as you have been commanded, and insha'Allah you will find me amongst the patient." The narration says that he ties a blindfold around his own eyes in order not to have to see what he is about to do to his own son. He takes that blade and he slices the neck. At this moment, he lifts and he can see from his eyes in front of him Ismail standing, but that he has slit the throat of this animal. The hadith says Ibrahim alayhi salam begins to cry. It says that he begins to weep. The narration says Jibreel Amin descends and presents him in front of Khalilullah. He says, "Oh Ibrahim, why do you cry? Allah has preserved your son Ismail." The narration states, Ibrahim responds. He says, "Oh Jibreel, I had committed to giving my son to Allah. I wanted to know what it feels like to give something so precious away in the way of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu." The hadith says, he says that this has been ransomed to come from your latter generation. "Oh Ibrahim, would you like to see this sacrifice that is going to occur in your posterity?" Ibrahim says, "Show me." The narration says, Jibreel says, "Look between these two trees." The veils are lifted and he sees a scene where there is an arrow that is being shot into the neck of into the neck of his own grandson, the son, the 6-month-old baby of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein. Jibreel says, "This is what is going to occur from your grandchildren." We are told by our dhakirin that when Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam would call out, "Hal min nasirin yansurna," who is there to come to my aid? That at this moment the 6-month-old baby would rock in his cradle as if to say, "Labbaik ya Aba Abdullah." "Oh Aba Abdullah, there is still one soldier that is left to go onto that battlefield. Oh Aba Abdullah, there is still one more proof that you can have in front of them. Oh my father Aba Abdullah, there is still one that wishes to give himself for your sake in this mission." We are told that Sayyid Zainab brings this child towards Imam al-Hussein and says, "Oh Hussein, there is no milk left in the mother. There is no water that has been given to this child for 3 days. His crying has stopped because he no longer has the energy to be able to cry. His eyes have sunken into the back of his head due to the thirst that he has. Will you go and bring some water for this child?" We are told that Imam al-Hussein asks for a white cloth. Why? because he wishes to wrap this baby, because the heat, the blaring heat of the Karbala sun is so much that maybe that if he was to bring this child out into that desert plain, the heat would be so much for him that he would not be able to take it. We ask you, O Aba Abdullah, indeed you were there to protect this 6-month-old baby with a cloth from the heat, but how will this cloth protect it from a 3-pronged arrow? I imagine, what is Sakina thinking in this moment? Sakina is the one that has been asking for water, not for herself but for her baby brother Asghar. She now sees her brother being taken to the battlefield. She would have had hope. Aba Abdullah is taking. There is no way this army will be able to refuse a 6-month-old baby for water. Oh Asghar, go and get your thirst quenched. Even if I am not able to have my thirst quenched, even if I cannot bring water for Muhammad al-Baqir, for Sajjad, at least Asghar can go and have some water. Hussein brings this baby out. We are told that as he brings it out, the army begin to talk amongst themselves and say, has Hussein come to negotiate with us? Has he come to submit to us? What does he have in his arms? Maybe this is the Quran in his hands. Maybe he has come to negotiate with the Quran. At this moment, he takes out a part of the cloth and holds high into the sky this baby. He says, if I have done you some wrong, if you think that I have some crime against you, then tell me, what crime has this 6-month-old baby committed? He is desirous of water. He is dying from his thirst. Is there a drop of water that you can give for this baby? At this moment, the army begin to look at themselves. What have we done? What have we become? There are dogs, there are animals that are drinking from the banks of the river Euphrates, but we have become such beasts ourselves that we do not give water to the grandchildren of Rasulullah. Our dhakirin tell us that at this moment, because they have still not provided any water to this baby, Hussein says that I will leave this child on the ground. If you think I will take the water and quench my thirst, I will leave this child on the ground. You come and give the child some water. Our dhakirin tell us that he places the child on the ground, but he remembers the story of Ismail, that Ismail was the one who kicked his feet against the ground and brought out Zamzam. What if Asghar was to kick his feet? Would Allah not bring water to Asghar? At this moment he picks up this child and presents it. The enemies begin to cry. The enemies begin to realize what people they have become in this moment. We are told that at this moment, Umar ibn Sa'ad calls out to Hurmala. Hurmala is the master of all the marksmen. He says, "Oh Hurmala, you have to silence this ayah of Hussein, this sign of Hussein. Because if our army begins to see what they have become, if they continue to cry over what they have done, they will change against us. You need to silence this. Take your arrow and shoot this child." We are told that he has 3 arrows and he takes the first one. We are told that as he takes this first one and begins to put in his bow and begins to take aim, we are told that he sees behind Hussein a lady in black that is standing outside the tents. She is pacing up and down. I imagine that this was the mother of Asghar, wondering what is happening. Has my baby been given any water? Because he sees this mother, the first arrow goes astray. We are told that he places a second arrow into his bow, and again from the side of his eye he sees this lady dressed in black walking up and down. I will ask you, was this the mother of Asghar, or was this Fatima the Zahra that was standing there at this moment? He places a third arrow. We are told that this arrow is a three-pronged arrow. The historians and Dhakirin ask, why is this special? What was it about this arrow? We are told that Hurmala, he struck 3 arrows on the afternoon of the 10th of Muharram. One of those arrows was the arrow that hit Abu Fadl in the eye. The second arrow that he struck was when he went towards assassinating and massacring Imam al-Hussein. The hadith says that as Imam al-Hussein is on the floor struggling after he has fallen from his horse, that someone came to Hussein and threw a rock on his face. Imam al-Hussein's face is struck open. The blood is falling upon his beard. Hussein lifted his shirt to wipe the blood away from his face. We are told that Hurmala came forward at this moment, that he took out an arrow and he placed this arrow at point blank range. We are told that when Hurmala was captured, they asked him about these 3 arrows that he shot. When he was describing this second arrow that he shot into Imam al-Hussein, they said, tell us about this arrow. He said, I dipped this arrow in poison specially for Hussein. He says, I walked up straight towards Hussein at point blank range. I fired the arrow into his heart. The arrow went so far in that Hussein had to pull the arrow out of his back. They said, tell us about the other arrow that you struck on the 10th of Muharram. He said, I struck the 6-month-old baby. This was a 3-pronged arrow. Why did he use a 3-pronged arrow? They say that there were 2 times in history the Arabs used 3-pronged arrows. The first reason was when they wanted to shoot a door. They would fire this arrow into a door in order to pull it out. They say the second reason was when they wanted to sacrifice a camel. They say the neck of a camel was so tough that it was difficult even to slaughter the neck of a camel. So they would take a 3-pronged arrow. They would pull out the arrow and they would shoot it at the neck of the camel. I ask you, O fathers, I ask you, O mothers, tell me how tough is the neck of a camel and how soft is the neck of a 6-month-old baby. What kind of beastly human being did this? He puts the arrow into his bow. He has already missed twice. Umar ibn Sa'd is shouting at him, finish the sign of Hussein, for if the rest of the army cries, we will not be able to control them. He pulls this arrow back. He lets it fly. What is Hussein thinking as he sees this arrow coming towards him? The arrow flies. It shoots into the neck of Ali al-Asghar. We are told in the hadith that Asghar's body shakes. His arms flap like a bird. Another narration says that he is struck so hard by this arrow, his body shakes like a fish outside of the water. We are told that he looks into the eyes of his father as if to say, Father, do not cry for me. Right now my thirst is being quenched by my grandfather. Oh Hussein, my father, do not cry for me. You will need your strength in a few minutes to fight. We are told in one hadith says the following, that Hussein, he can't bear to take this child back towards its mother. He walks with this child towards the enemies. He recites, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. He turns back, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Again he walks towards the enemies, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. The hadith says that on the 7th time a voice comes from the sky. It says, Oh Hussein, there is a mother who is waiting to hear about the news of her child. Do not keep her waiting any longer. Hussein walks back towards the Thames. We are told that Sakina runs out to meet Hussein. Oh father, did they quench the thirst of my brother Asghar? Tell me what happened. We are told that Hussein extends his arms. He says, Oh Sakina, take your baby brother. Hussein does not have the strength at this moment to take this anymore. The ladies come out, they hear this commotion, they want to see what has happened to their baby beloved child Asghar. And they see Asghar's head hanging from the back of his head, back of his neck. They cry out, Wa Asghara, Wa Muhammada, Wa Aliya, Wa Husayna, what have they done to my child? How does a father tell what has happened to the mother at this moment? We are told that Hussein goes towards the back of the tent and digs a small hole for this child. He places the baby inside. We are told that we are asked, where is that baby right now? If he buried this child inside a grave for itself, where is this baby? The ulama tell us that when you go to Karbala and you visit the grave of Abu Abdullah, we are told that the family members are in certain positions. Who is by his feet? Who is where? The ulama asked, where is Asghar buried? They say that when Zainul Abidin buried all of the shuhada, he placed Asghar on the chest of Hussein, because a child loves to sleep on the chest of his father, and a father loves to hold a baby towards his chest. And this was the last moments of Asghar on the chest of Abu Abdullah. Matam Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein.